This is Art Talk with April, an artist podcast where we meet artists from all around the southeastern states and around the world. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started. Check out part 2 with Holli Conger.
I decided to get in licensing. Again, it was fairly newish as far as being online on how to do it. Of course,
Yeah.
Artists license their work forever, but it was more of a kind of a new thing to kind of get into because other people were kind of talking about it and how you do it, things like that.
Are you talking about like surface design?
Like surface design, greeting cards.
Okay,
like products, garden flags,
I got
figurines, gift items, gift bags, things like that.
Wow.
And so there's a big show in New York called Surtex, and you would go and you would have to pay, I don't know how much, it was a few $1,000s to go and have this booth there.
Sure.
And you an artist would then, show all their stuff, and they'd have people who are art buyers come in and flip through your portfolio. You could sign contracts right there on the floor, or it was like, hey, send me this. So that was, again, way out of my comfort zone. And then it was in New York, and I had never been to New York, and I was going to have to drive to New York because I had to bring my booth stuff with me. I couldn't fly. So luckily my mom came with me and helped me do it all. And I think I spent about $10,000 to do that, and then for hotel and everything. And then I got that back within 6 months from all those contacts.
Oh wow!
And that was what 2015. I think I said 2010. Sorry.
Yeah,
I think that was in. I still work with a few of those people today.
Wow.
That kind of thing. And so that was a good experience, and it was something different. And it's grown up artwork. It's not for kids. It's for, for adults. And so, making a garden flag and things like that. So I could then, work in a different type of theme and things like that, and style. And I do mostly still my found object work that's collagey and things like that. It's just more grown up, I guess, florals and things like that. And so that's been really nice too. And I had an agent with that for a little while, and then I left them, and then I kind of got into another agency and just kind of did stuff on my own as I felt like doing it. It wasn't a set, we got this to show to people. But I've recently left them because I've made more money on my own with licensing than having to go through an agent, things like that. I went from illustration to illustration and wall art to illustration and licensing. I've done little experiments of different things and styles. I took a pottery class, I guess at the beginning of COVID, before COVID happened that year. I want to do pottery because, again, that's away from the computer, and I just like building stuff and things like that. So I ended up like getting a kiln and stuff here, but I'm just crazy. So I did and I wish I had more time for pottery, and I don't like my hands being filthy all the time. So that's what's really hard for me too with pottery, because I was just constantly going to wash them. But I had done a show a couple of years ago for a guy in town had contacted me. He owns a salon downtown, but he also has wall space where he features artists all the time. And so he said, I've got 6 months if you want to do 3 different shows, or if you just want to do one show or whatever. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll do 3, but I want to be able to experiment. So he's like, go ahead. And so I did clay for my first one, where I did like kind of these just clay. It's like flat clay and then built up like faces and things like that. And I think almost all of those sold out.
Holy cow.
And then the other 2 shows weren't as great, but that's okay. But I was able to experiment and not necessarily do my found object-y style, I still had my pottery work where my characters were like funky.
Yeah.
And I did, I used found objects to press into the clay and things like that.
Yeah.
And then my second show I did found object like wooden eyes and then like a wood nose just on a flat plane and
Yeah.
things like that. Still keeping to my dimensionalness,
Yeah.
but just a little different. In the last show, I think was just all collage stuff
Well,
pieced
I mean, I
together.
guess one of
But
the things that has always fascinated me about your work and, like, okay, you are using different mediums and exploring different things, but it's kind of like it it's all cohesive. It's all
mhm,
consistent. And even if some is more like decorative or grown up, you can still tell that it's yours,
mhm,
and how it,
mhm,
all just kind of ties together. I think that is so cool. And I think,
mhm,
you know, another thing about your career and the span of your career is that you've also like put your work into all these different channels. So if one isn't doing well, another one may do better, and it can kind of keep you going or keep you,
mhm,
I guess financially stable so that you can kind of
mhm,
keep on working. Oh, that's
mhm.
amazing. I
Yeah,
think,
and it's important to have different revenue streams,
yeah, yeah,
even if you're just an illustrator and you're like, all I can do is illustrate digitally. Then I
yeah,
was like, well, offer stickers,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, offer prints. I've offered prints in the past. Nobody wants a print of mine. But stickers, it's true. It's stickers.
That's great
I'll sell
though.
a ton of stickers,
Yeah,
but I would think, it may be because my work is so dimensional and like tactile that
yeah.
they just, why have a print of it? But I have stickers. I do well with stickers, but that's really, and then, and I'll do little things here and there of what's important for me with my found object stuff is that it's affordable. Because there's so much stuff and there's like, I did this piece or this painting and it's $10,000 and it's like, but who's gonna buy it?
Yeah,
And then you're gonna have like I
feel
see
like in a
people,
corporate office or something.
right, or I see people who, here is, I've worked for the last 20 years, as a watercolor artist. And so here's like, let me go into all my files and see all the work that I've made over the years. And I'm like, but you still have it. Is it, and it's usually because it's price tied. Now, I'm not telling people that you're not worth the price, but I want to make it affordable for anybody to be able to buy it.
Yeah,
And I don't buy, my art supplies are very, very cheap and they're, a lot of it is trash,
yeah,
that somebody who's going to throw away. And I don't want my work hanging around because I don't have the space for it. So I want to
sure.
make it and,
Get it
send it
out.
to its own home.
Yeah.
And so that's important to me that, I had somebody ask me something one time about, oh, how awful. How can you make it that cheap? I would never be able to make this that cheap, and stuff. And I'm like, but I already have all the supplies.
Mhm.
I will keep a little piece of paper that's like this tiny because I'll use it on something else, you know. And like
Oh, it's awesome.
one of the things I do is I do pet portraits, and
Mm.
it's only cat and dogs, and I usually kind of open up those commissions towards the end of the year, but I'm currently working. I had some time, so I'm working on a few right now. But this is, I mean, I'm not buying anything. I have it all, and I have like all my dog colors that are like white and brown and
Sure.
black. They're all like little strips of paper. And I was this morning working on some, and I'm like, I'm gonna cut this little eyeball out and put it here, and then I'm putting this little scrap of paper back because I'm gonna use that. So I already have everything, and so I'm not having to buy a bunch of like a really nice canvas or
Yeah, yeah,
anything like that. Um, but you know, I enjoy it.
yeah.
You know,
I love your work, and I feel like I want to say the other day, or I don't know, it might have been today. I have no idea because I'm on LinkedIn constantly because I'm a graphic designer, and so
Mhm.
I've got like I'm just constantly on LinkedIn posting stuff for work. And I saw, I think one of your found object pieces, and I have to say, like I think I don't know if I just haven't. I guess most likely I haven't seen you posting on like Instagram as much.
Mhm.
And I can tell that like you have really grown. Like it was just I was just like, whoa, holy cow. How could it get even better?
Oh,
You do really cool stuff. So
thank
I mean,
you.
and I can imagine like, especially the stuff that you're like putting in galleries and selling, gosh, that has to be just amazing. And
Yeah.
like, what are you doing as far as like, are you doing series that you're like putting into these spaces? Is that kind of how you're thinking about it? Like, like when you were in the salon or what, I
Mhm.
can't remember what place it was, but you
Yeah.
said that they let you experiment, but you kind of did like a grouping of, I guess.
Right. I did for the salon. Each show had like a theme, and it was a theme that I had come up with.
Yeah.
He didn't care what I did. And then I've done a bird show. I did a bird show for 6 or 7 years in a row. This is my first year. I was like, and I've done like over 100 birds. I'm like,
Wow.
I can't do any more birds right now. But yeah, I really don't do much of a grouping. I
Mm.
think I just whatever I want to do, like whatever weird thing comes in my head, I'll do, or I'll and I don't do commissions on those except for the pet portraits
Yeah,
because I do so much assignment work with illustration stuff. I just want to make what I want to make.
sure.
I just want to have the freedom to do that. And if you like the end product and want to buy it, all the better. But sometimes I'll find like a scrap of wood and I'm
Mm.
like, that looks like, a weird face,
Mm.
or this would make a great nose, or I'll just have an idea of a theme and sketch something out.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes the ideas will be on my sketchbook for a few years
Oh, wow.
because because I'm so weird, but I have to build it in my head before I can physically build it.
Oh,
And I
wow.
work really fast. I mean, I can finish a piece in a day that's really big, and I work best if it's you know, like for my bird show, like I knew all year it was coming up.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks before the bird show, I'm like, I'm gonna have to start making some birds.
Oh,
So
no.
but I work best like that. And I know that, I mean, I drive the people in my family crazy because of it.
Yeah.
But that's how I work best. And I work best if I've got a lot going on. Like if I have this show and then I've got a book project that I have to illustrate. I work best when I'm, driving myself crazy with everything. And it's not procrastination. It's just I got to build it in my head. I know that I'm gonna get it done,
Yeah.
and that's because if I do it here and there, it just takes me forever to do it. And so, but like I have some pieces that I really want to do. Like I really want to do a Theodore Roosevelt piece. And I've been every now and then I'll see something. I'm like, oh, that would look good in that piece. So I'll collect that and things like that. And but I don't have him in my mind how I want him to look yet. So I can't start
Oh.
start on him. But I have a frame in the garage so I'm like, that might work. Let me just keep that. But I have like all
Oh,
kinds
that's
of
so
stuff in my
fun.
studio, just and stuff in my garage, like an old frame, or um, I might have an old cutting board. I use a lot of
Mhm.
cutting boards because you find those at thrift stores all the time for
Sure.
heads and things like that. But I like the quirky, kind of funny, clever,
Yeah.
um, kind of stuff. I just finished a piece, and since I'm from the South, I just love that, like just the southern feel of stuff, and the southern like old barns and
Mhm.
and a simpler way of life and things like I would love to have lived in the 40s on a farm. Like I think that would have been like, and my grandparents, that's how they grew up. And I remember
Yeah.
asking my grandmother one time about how were you just like in the Great Depression, like how were y'all just not just stressed out all the time? And stuff. And she's like, well, you didn't know any other way. Everything was like, you work on the farm, you do this, in the garden, and that's just how it was. You didn't necessarily see everything that was going on around you because your daily life is your daily life of taking care of yourself. You're not worrying about, I guess what other people in the big city would have worried about
Yeah.
during that time. But she said, you didn't know any different. So why get stressed over something you don't know anything about or have
Yeah.
to necessarily deal with because today was just like yesterday, pretty much.
Mhm.
So I like that, and that kind of comes into play about finding found objects that have a history of something, or
Oh.
I really like that kind of uh, you know the 30s 40s, those postage stamps that
Yeah.
were that time, or even like I found like an old recipe book at a yard sale, and it was like, the clippings of the newspaper, and it's in there, and then it's handwritten stuff,
Wow.
and some of the stuff is like, this sounds disgusting, something in a big jello mold with like meat and stuff, like bleh. But it's the handwritten stuff. It's the
Yeah.
old postcards. It's just using that kind of material where each little item kind of tells a story in itself. And
Mm.
so getting back to what I was talking about was I'd recently, years ago, well, not years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I had done a piece that was like of a farmer's wife.
Yeah.
And so I had named it The Eighth Day, which is a speech that Paul Harvey, I don't know if you know who Paul Harvey is. He he had given a speech at the Future Farmers of America convention or something in the 70s. And I even think that it was like on an old like Ford commercial or something that played in the Super Bowl several years ago. But it was basically all these things about a farmer,
Yeah.
and it just reminds me of my grandparents and things like that. And so I just
Yeah.
love it. And I was like, that is so much my granddaddy on how, this is the things that a farmer does and things like that.
Yeah.
So I was just inspired by that piece, that speech that he had done. And so I had built this, or I had done this found object piece
Yeah.
of the farmer's wife, things like that. And so I put little trinkets and stuff that, like I remember like my grandmother had this or that. So I'm going to put that here. And I had found the same kind of handle she used to have on her kitchen cabinets, and I put it on there, things like that. And so
Oh,
then recently I had done another piece that was the farmer. And
yeah.
so it was, kind of inspired by the same thing and stuff. So it was kind of like, I guess there in a piece like that, there's just more storytelling and things from here and here and here and stuff that it means a lot to me, but other people might see and they're like, oh, I recognize that. That's,
Yeah.
something. But I really don't do much current event kind of stuff.
Sure.
I don't, if I do portraits of people, I tend to not do people who are still alive, or if they are alive, it's like they're a character in themselves. They're not, I don't want to make fun of, like I did a Walton Goggins little thing, I guess a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh, should I really do it or not? Because he's still, because so, but I was like, no, he is a caricature, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna do it, and I'm gonna, because I don't want him to be like, oh my goodness, she's making fun of me when I'm not. But stuff like that. I'm so cautious of that kind of thing. I
Yeah.
don't want to do something that somebody might
Get upset
think
about
that I'm
or
making fun of them
yeah.
or something like that. But but yeah, I just kind of just do stuff that I I just feel like doing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. And it sounds like you've like built that into your practice and the way that the kinds of work that you're taking on and the kinds of things that you're interested in doing, you've kind of protected that piece of it, where you are able to kind of, focus on some things that you really enjoy doing. Do you do a lot of illustration stuff still? Like,
I do. I don't do as much as I used to.
sure.
And that's probably really since COVID. It's
Mm,
probably because I don't send postcards out anymore.
yeah,
I don't have a real grasp on who's there and who's not
yeah.
anymore. Um, and so I don't want to be, is it a waste to send this kind of stuff out and things? And my agent, she regularly, sends things out. So I guess I'm kind of this right now in my career, I'm kind of happy with, doing illustration work
On
as
the
it comes, not
yeah,
necessarily I gotta find it, because
yeah.
it allows me to work on this other stuff. And like my kids are, older now. My daughter's gonna be a senior in college next year. And then my son starts high school this year. And so they're like conversation wise, they're on a different level than they used to be. So it's like, I'll be working on something and it's like we've been talking for like 2 hours and it's like, oh, I've got to get back to what I was doing. And because my kids were homeschooled and my son's still
Oh,
homeschooled.
okay.
So that works too. And my life as an artist, because
Hmm.
we can just do whatever together in the studio. But if we want to go like to a thrift store in the middle of the day, let's go together and figure out stuff. And when my son was little, when we go to thrift stores and things, it would always be like, you've got to find 5 things that you've never seen before. Like by doing that, he can kind of see the old way people used to do something, like the hand
Okay.
mixer with the little thing. It's like, well, that's what we had before there was electricity. And it's like, my grandmother had one of these, but she always had an electric mixer, but I knew that that used to be her mother's and things like that. So, I try and involve my kids in what I do, but try to make it educational, because I like, again, with the things I use have this whole story to it. I like them to learn backgrounds on things that maybe they wouldn't know how to do. Like I had done a career day several years ago, and there was a writer who was next to me, and she brought a typewriter.
Wow.
And the kids were like, "What is this?" Like
That's
they had never seen this thing before. And I'm like,
awesome.
"You've never seen a typewriter?" It's like, oh, so I think it's important that my kids, to me, it's important that my kids know what old stuff was and
Oh,
uses
wow.
it. And it was so funny because I talk about, I don't know how many times a week I say, well, that wasn't a thing when I was a kid.
Mm,
Like when I was a kid, we didn't have to carry water all the time. Why
mm,
do we carry water all the time now?
yeah.
And all these water bottles and things like that. That just wasn't a thing then. Or it's fun, and I like how it works into my weird found object work of stuff. So
I am just fascinated. I mean, like you went through, like all the things that, we think about as artists and how we, go through our way of finding our path, and you're making choices around, okay, well, I'm a mom and I need to, you know, I want to be around my children, or we're doing homeschooling, and how can I make this work with what I'm,
mhm.
doing or whatever. I think that is so awesome because, a lot of people, they, especially through college, I think maybe, I don't know, but you kind of have this idea of like there's one way to do things. And just
Mhm.
hearing, that there's a possibility of kind of combining stuff and kind of choosing, I want to do this kind of project versus, because I think, oh my God, doing the pet portrait commissions and like calling it and
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to do other kind. I mean, that's awesome
Yeah. Yeah.
because that could get out of control fast. And then
Mhm.
that you can take the pet portrait commissions and that it'll probably be around, seasonal gift giving
Mhm.
time. and then you can kind of move on from it and do other
Mhm.
things. So it's little things like that, like they're through talking with different kinds of artists, it's sort of like people will get these ideas in their heads that the only way that I'm going to make a living is through pet portraits, and that's it. And they can't seem to like open up their mind to a possibility of maybe if I, just change it a little bit or just experiment over here,
Mhm.
something else would happen. Maybe it would be
Mhm.
a successful thing, like going out to the galleries and saying, I would like to be a part of this or whatever.
Mhm.
What kind of advice would you give someone who's, I mean, not necessarily an illustrator, but just someone who's like creatively inclined and they're maybe they're stuck, maybe they're, I don't know, they're interested in exploring something else. Like, what would you tell somebody?
I would tell them just to start doing it and let people know you're doing it, whether, hey, I'm selling this at, the farmer's market this weekend,
Yeah.
um, post it on social media. But you need to be okay with it. Your style and everything is going to be a progression. Like I
Mhm.
was saying, like when I look back at my old, the more different you are than someone else doing something, the better you're going to be. Because, I started doing this found object style and stuff like that, and I'm still kind of the only person doing it. You
Yeah.
know, I've seen some people, do some of it, but make the style your own. Make it yours. Don't do something because someone else is successful at it, because you're never going to reach that level because you think they're the best already. So do something that you love doing. And if you want to go to art school and you want to be an artist, I would suggest be a graphic designer and start from there, because if you're going to be an illustrator, it's going to help you to know how to lay out a postcard. It's going to help you to know how to do a website. It's going to help you to know how to do branding and things like that. And chances are you've had some kind of advertising or marketing experience within
Yeah.
school doing that. So you know how it's going to work. And there's always that kind of fallback on, well, I'm not going to make a living at painting, but I'm going to paint on the side, and then I'm going to do graphic design full time, because everybody needs a graphic designer. From, anything visually you see, a designer did it.
Yeah.
Even if it's, the buttons that are on your car radio, that had to be done by a designer.
Somebody typed it out.
Yeah. And so that can be a fallback if you feel like you need a fallback.
Yeah.
If you have parents who are like, you can't make a living as an artist, you can, but
Yeah.
that's a good fallback that might be something that they can like agree with
Yeah,
or
like a
something. I
nice
don't know.
balance. Like you can be creative, but
Right.
we can support this direction.
Right. But yeah, if you're able to go to school to be an artist, maybe your focus should be graphic design. And like when I went to school, we had a whole class on illustration. We
Sure.
had a whole class on photography. It's all that kind of stuff. But if you need a job title fallback, that would be a good one to do.
That's so
And
true.
um and one piece of advice we got when we left school, and some people wanted just to have a freelance career, I had a professor who said, well, first you need a job to mess up something on someone else's dime. So if you had, there was
Practice.
a girl she had done an internship at a big university, and they had gotten these brochures for their admissions brochures, and they had, I don't know how many thousand she said they printed, and on the front cover was a picture of the campus with a big FPO, for position only,
across the image.
Oh no.
So they had to fix it, but it had been approved apparently. And so, they had to pay for a whole other print run. Now, if you did that freelance, chances are that would be on you, and you would have to pay for that entire print run. So her advice was very good about messing up on someone else's dime, because that's how you're going to learn. And you always have a contract when you're working, things like that. And you can pick your clients. You can fire clients. You don't have to say yes to everything. I know sometimes it feels like I've got to say yes because I might not work ever again. But you've got to, and that just comes with age and with the progression of your career, how you're more comfortable saying no and knowing what you love to do and not want to do, and make sure you're doing things that you want to do. Like if you have something, so if you're going to be a designer or illustrator, illustrators are notorious for not being able to draw horses. And I mean, horses and forks.
Is that real? Like a real thing?
Yes. If it's a horse and something, I'm like, I don't know about that. Horses, forks, and then bicycles are what's really hard for me. I don't know why forks, but I get by with it because I've drawn a really good fork once, and I'll stick to that one fork, and I'll use that as my template for future forks.
That's awesome.
Isn't that crazy? But let's say, I had done this farm image years ago, and that was put in my portfolio. Well, I probably got 10 jobs to do a farm illustration of some sort. And I don't really love, drawing
your favorite things
and things like that. But so I was like, oh, it's because of that image I put in there. Everybody wants this. So just make sure that you really enjoy it. You might think it looks cool and something might look really, really good, but do you really want to draw 10 of those themes, that kind of thing? And and then constantly, put new work out there, constantly do stuff, even if it's some little doodle or something like that, because that keeps you busy. And every day I try and do something for my business, whether it's emailing somebody something, or making a post on social media, or checking something online, kind of off my list or whatever, updating my website, but something every day, instead of I need to wait, just do it, and then it'll just become habit.
That is great advice. All of that is such great advice. And I love the thing about, because I think that fits with so many things. Like, even if you're a fine artist and like maybe you're dabbling like in painting horses or something like that, but it's not like your favorite thing to do, and you're posting it online, and then you get commissions for horses, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
So like, think about creating the things and sharing the things that you would love to do a whole bunch more of, like getting a lot of, like, if cats are your thing and you really love drawing cats or painting cats or, sculpting or whatever, go for it. But if you don't really like it all that much, just that's great advice.
Right. But it's good that you did it to begin with, because now you don't like doing it.
Yeah. Figured out, okay. I had this commission one time, and he's a friend of my husband's, and he might even listen to this, I don't know, but it was trains. It was drawing trains. And I was like, oh yeah, I got that. I do that. It was different. It was outside of my wheelhouse, but I was like, I'll give it a shot. Holy cow. I've never disliked trains so much in my life. I mean, just all the little gears and things at the bottom. And I was like, this is terrible. It took me forever to finish.
Yeah.
Because I just liked it so much. I was like, man, I have really learned my lesson.
Yeah.
But he was happy with it, and I tried it. I don't think I will ever post or share a train ever again.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is such great advice. So, who are some of your like most inspiring artists, illustrators?
I don't know. I have a hard time thinking about my favorites,
Yeah,
like favorite actors and movies and songs and
sure.
um
It's hard
and
to
everything.
choose.
I tend to like the more kind of weird kooky stuff,
Yeah,
but I also like the like cute
sure.
stuff. But I mean in school and stuff I like Picasso and Matisse and things like that. It's interesting how I see different styles of art that aren't necessarily like visual art as far as paintings and things like I love movies and I love certain directors and
Sure.
stuff and musicians, and like probably my favorite work of art ever is the play Hamilton, just
Oh,
because of all the different aspects and the creative way, and I'd seen a documentary about it. I love documentaries, but seeing how the process that he used to do it, the
yeah.
influences, and bringing visually that together, musically that together, the history of it all,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I probably think about I like I love the Beatles, but I never really loved, because it was like Paul's the best. And so it wasn't until probably 5 years ago, I was trying to find some music to work with. And I was like, well, I'm just going to do some of this George Harrison stuff and kind of see what he was all about. Well, I was like, and I felt so bad. I'm like, I never liked you before, but now you're my favorite. Because and just the progression of his career after the Beatles, he tried so many different things and was, he might have been successful at one of or two of those kind of things, but musically, like the influence of, I guess, the Indian type influence, and then you know just different styles of music where cohesively they're not the same, but he just kept trying and experimenting just because he wanted. And I guess him if you're thinking about, he had all the money he could ever need. He has nothing to prove. He's just being who he is and being creative and making all kinds of different things. And
Yeah.
that's kind of where I would like to be, um,
Mm.
where I'm not having to think, oh, could I sell this? Or I need to make this because, I could sell it, or I need to draw this whole collection so I can license it to stuff. I can't just do it to do it. Like I don't, and that's been hard to get out of that headspace,
Sure.
because early on in your career, you're like, I've got to make money. I've got to do this.
Yeah.
But now maybe just by getting older, more doing it because that's what makes me happy and
Sure.
fulfilled and experimenting rather than trying to make a living, because making a living is already coming along with, if you love what you do, you won't have to worry about where the money's coming from, because it's
Yeah.
gonna all work out.
Sure. Oh man, that is so fascinating. And I love the Beatles and I love Hamilton. That's awesome. So I get where you're coming from on that. And well, you're just so inspiring
Thank you.
and talented. I love all this different stuff and experimenting that you do. I think it's so cool. Where can we like look you up on the internet and everything?
um of course, hollyconger.com, Holly with an I. I'm on Instagram. Instagram is mainly my main social media thing.
Okay.
I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. Um, if you put my name into Amazon, a whole bunch of stuff comes, like books that I've done, a lot of like licensing
Oh,
wall
that
art
would be
and
cool to see. Yeah.
things like that. I try and upload stuff on Pinterest of like any products I've done, new illustration work, things like that. I've kind of slacked off that for whatever reason, but I just I'm in all kinds of little
Yeah, little
areas.
spaces.
But
it's
yeah,
HolliConger.
right.
Yeah.
And I usually post everything on Instagram that's new or that I'm doing illustration work if I have a new book coming out or something specific. And, and some of the illustration work I do is like just educational work. So it's really just a workbook that they only really sell to schools and curriculum and things like that. So you couldn't find that. But if it's a book, a kid's book or something like that, I'll usually post something or a product.
Well, interesting though. I mean, like there may be people out there that not even realizing, oh, those are illustrations. Someone created that. That was in that, work or whatever.
Yeah.
Just mentioning it can be like a career path.
Right. And educational, it's pretty structured on how they want things to be. And you've got to understand you don't have as much freedom as you would with doing a character in a children's book or something like that. But it's usually with educational work, you usually get a lot of it. So, it's a pretty well-paying job to do a workbook or something like that. One thing that it used to be the case, and I think it still is the case, is if you want to get into educational work, you're probably going to need to have an agent.
Oh,
Because
really?
what the they're packagers is what they're called.
Yeah.
So let's say there's a design company who is doing work for,
Like
say, National Geographic
or something. Yeah, national.
or something like that.
Yeah.
The company who was hiring and buying art, who are hiring the illustrators, they might have, 5,000 illustrations they need. Well, they're going to probably go to one agent to say, hey, do you have 20 illustrators we can use for this? Rather than go individually, it's easy for paperwork, it's easy for everything. That's just, that's just how it's going to work for that. But you totally don't need an agent, but you really need to be good at marketing. But even an agent won't get you work. You have to put in the time to market yourself and things like that. And like, when people email me for work, I'm like, okay, yeah, this project sounds good. I'm copying my agent on this to keep her in the loop. All paperwork, everything comes to her. But I can work directly with you, no problem. She's, she's there for businessy and moral support if I need it. But and sometimes people don't like signing with agents or giving their existing client list to their agent because they just feel like, well, those are my clients. I need to keep them. And I've had some conversations when I was doing consulting with actually several illustrators who were like, well, I don't want to give up this client that I've had, because sometimes the agent will take a shorter or a smaller percentage of if you work with that client again. But the thing you have to remember is, well, April has this client over here that Holly doesn't know about, but my agent does because April brought the client in. Well, maybe I can work for that client too. That kind of thing. Like you're sharing your whole client roster with everybody. So you're going to end up getting more work by sharing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously you can stipulate in whatever contract you have with an agent, but I didn't think it was a big deal when I signed, and I didn't feel like the way other people that I've talked to had felt when they signed up with different agents and things like that they were giving away their client list. And I'm like, well, you're really sharing it. You're sharing it. And, because obviously if it's like a one-off book with a publisher that nobody will work with again, but if it's like, a contact that you have at, like Bloomberg or somewhere like that, well, chances are they're going to need other artists because they're not going to want to stick with one artist for the next 10 years, things like that. So you're just sharing, and you can always say no to, jobs, or you can promote on your own and things like that. So, but I can't say that an agent has helped me.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like, but with licensing, I tended to make more on my own than with a licensing agency. Plus, they take a larger percentage than they take about 50%.
Oh my gosh.
But
That's
But yeah,
interesting.
with licensing, you're making money off a little drawing for years and years. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Man, there's just so many, okay, like, because you have been in so many different little nooks and crannies of the creative world, you're like got all this wisdom of these little things, that people are like, okay, licensing agents, they take more percentage or you share your, that's so fascinating because
Yeah.
that's all the stuff that's behind the scenes that unless you're specifically doing that work in that moment with those clients or with that agent, you don't experience it. You don't even know that it exists. Nobody ever really says
Yeah.
anything about it, So that's
And I
interesting.
think with like if you have a design client, that would be different than an illustration client because
Sure.
you can design for a client forever because things will look different no matter what because it's different, your work's in different contexts and mediums and stuff like that. With illustration, if you have a style, well, they want your style for this one book, but their next book that has to do with trains, well, they're going to pick somebody who loves to do trains. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's not like and you're still probably going to work with that client again on another project, but it's all about what your style is
Sure.
appropriate for. If you're a
Sure.
designer, you can kind of morph and do a look
Yeah.
and things like that a little differently than you can in Illustrator. Um,
That makes sense because as illustrators, you're more likely to have an individual style that you're sticking to. And so, like if you're working with a publisher, they're not going to want your illustrations on every single book,
right.
because then
Mhm.
they're all going to look the same and they can't market them to
Mhm.
whatever, direction they want to, and it won't look unique. It'll all,
Mhm.
I guess maybe if you're doing a series of books or something, that
Right.
would, but
And like I had a similar conversation with my daughter. She's in film school, and so her focus is screenwriting. So we were talking about she was dealing with some having to write something that really isn't her style. And
yeah,
so I said, well, for right now, being in school, if you want to experiment and do that, but if you really don't feel comfortable or it's this really off the wall kind of wacky subject that you're just, because she really likes just storytelling, but if it's some kind of superficial weird that you can't relate to either, you don't
yeah,
have to do it. And I said, I think a lot of people think that, oh, you can write, well, write this,
yeah.
or you can draw
All
this.
this.
And it's like I had gotten someone who emailed me for a job, and it was it was a well-known publisher, and they wanted it to be this realistic looking thing. And I'm like, and where in my portfolio does it look
Yeah,
like it's realistic work? And it was like, well, I just thought that, you
because you
know,
could.
you can draw that. And I'm like, but
Yeah.
I don't want to.
I know. That's fine.
um, but you never want to burn bridges. So you always
Yeah,
want to be like,
yeah,
thank you so much. I don't think I'm right for this, but do keep me in mind for anything my style will work for. And sometimes I'll recommend someone else. I'll sometimes recommend someone else that my agent has, just still to try and help, because I'm helping her get work
yeah.
too.
Feeding into that.
Um, but yeah, you need to know what you can and can't do or uncomfortable with, but understand too that a lot of people think that if you can draw, then you're going to draw a great horse. And I'm going to tell you, it's not going to look like a horse.
Great train. Oh man, and like the guy that I did the trains for, he's awesome and he loves it and everything. But I can see all these things that are wrong with it, and I'm like,
Right.
man, I was not the person to do that. Like I'm great with animals, more
Uh-huh.
organic shapes, but mechanical pieces, like drawing something like
Mm-hmm.
that is just so intense. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
I think people too don't realize that you will get a better result if you ask somebody who does that thing specifically.
Yeah.
Like you can't just go to any artist and ask them to, paint whatever. Find someone who does that specific thing, because then they're going to really knock it out of the park. You know what I mean? Same thing with writing. Like if your daughter is like, this is just not me, how is she going to be able to like I don't know that much about writing, but like develop a character that she can't relate to at all,
right.
Something like that.
Yeah, or and not to tell too much about what she's doing in school, but it's very much her classmates are very much like, I have experienced this thing that I want to write about, or I want you to write about, because you're the writer. And she's like, but I didn't experience, I don't feel that, I feel differently. And so then they come back and tell her that no, this is unrealistic, but she's like, but this is how it, even like there was something about, well, a child, how she had written something, well, a child really wouldn't say this and this, or to be that immature sounding. And with her, she's like, but that's what I did when I was a kid. And I said, it's, everybody has different experiences and stuff, and and it's so hard to, this as a designer, to somebody has something in their head that they want you to create for them, but they don't know exactly what they want.
I'll know it when I see it. Yeah.
Right. Right. And then it's like, yeah, it's not that. I was thinking more towards, well, tell me up front what you were thinking more towards. And that's a good thing with, as far as illustration, you can at least have a sketch and sketch it all out, and then approve that sketch, and then do all your work. With the design, it was kind of hard doing that thing, as because you're like, this looks great, it's done. And they're like, I'll change all of it. And so you have to redo the whole, like the same amount of time.
Yeah, you're already in the software doing the thing, and you don't do sketches before you send off a design again.
Right.
So you get kind of stuck where you have to just go with the flow, and you got to be able to take criticism.
Yeah.
Just go with it.
Yep. And then you'll know that I might not want to work with them again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's okay, because that's how you learn.
Yeah. 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 I've had many good client where I was like, okay, you're special, and I don't know if I can do this anymore.
And I think that's why I tend to work more with people who are in publishing, who regularly work with illustrators. I've only done a couple of self-publishing things, and part of that feels like I don't want to have to educate them on how to work. I don't have time for that. And those jobs are usually, they have absolutely no clue how much it would cost to do it. And they're like, I have $500 for a full,
Look, I'm in an illustration group on Facebook, and there are illustrators who are like, $20 a page for a children's book or something like that. $20 for a full page illustration? I'm just like, what are you talking about? Why are you posting this and telling people that you would take that? Like, how would you ever be successful and be able to but they put those, some people put those numbers out there, and then that confuses everybody,
Yeah. And that's, if you have an agent, that's where it comes in handy, because they can be like, there's no way, here's what it would cost realistically. And I'll get people wanting quotes every now and then, knowing that I'm not going to do the work for them. But I'll say, if you hired a professional illustrator, this is how much it would cost. Then you're going to have to add on the cost for a designer. Then you're going to have to pay to print. You've got to really figure out what you're doing. But yeah, and I mean, and again, everything comes, I might have, when I first started, would do a page that's, way less than I normally would. But when you first start out, you do have that little desperation of, I need to have a portfolio piece, and being able to see a printed piece is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And then, as your career grows, I mean, you're gonna, it'll all work out. It'll be okay. Sometimes when you start out, you're gonna make the decision to do something way cheaper, but that's okay because you're gonna build up and you're gonna learn.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
Well, thank you so much, Holly,
Sure.
for talking with me today. It's been such a pleasure to get to just sort of, ask all the questions that I guess I always wanted to ask.
Oh, well. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Art Talk with April. New episodes are out every Tuesday at 6 p.m.